Hello everyone and welcome to the Craft Distilling Expo virtual. Today we've got another great session with a firm favourite that's been speaking at the Expo for many years. We've got Tommy Haughton from Beacon Commodities, great botanical supplier, gonna tell us all about what's going on in the botanical market. So those gin producers or aquavit or absinthe, this is someone to really have a listen to, and we're gonna bust some myths as well, and I think that's where we're going to start. But first I'll just let Tommy tell you a little bit about himself and the company, and then we'll get right into it.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I think we're there at the first Craft Expo and still going this year, obviously a bit different. And so we are botanical suppliers. We buy our botanicals from around the world, sourcing them in a number of countries, bringing them to the UK where we store it in Essex and then distribute from there to major distillers who have been around for a long time to new craft distillers popping up both here in the UK and abroad now. So I think we now ship to 6 continents, and export market actually weirdly during COVID grew significantly. So and it's Dad and I, father and son team. We work remotely, so very little change for us apart from the lack of travel.
Excellent. Right. Well, thanks for joining us, and thanks for all the support over the years. We'll start off with a let's bust a myth, which was some news that came out probably end of last month. We saw headlines such as UK gin threatened as plant disease grips juniper trees, and it's about this disease that's in some of the Scottish juniper, and there's talk about how Scotland produces 70% of the UK's gin, and it sounds like, you know, stories like we're going to run out of gin and all this kind of thing. Tommy, should I start stocking up? Should I be afraid?
No, I think you'll be fine, David. Yeah, it's we had a few telephone calls from journalists. I even had friends ringing up saying, "Oh my God, is this true?" And you're like, "Come on, what paper are you reading? Is that the Daily Mail online or something?" No, we're okay. There will obviously, as I think we've touched upon, you know, there are some guys in Scotland using Scottish juniper, and yes, that it will be a little bit of an issue. However, this was an issue 5 years ago from memory, and I think the plants are building up a resistance to it, and the quantities are so small. No, all the 70% of gin made in Scotland, they still all buy their stuff from the Balkans or Italy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it is a story, like you said, it does rear its head every so often. If you go back and you look through, it keeps popping up, and the gin's not run out and things like that. I think it's just a little bit of lazy journalism, personally, a little bit clickbait, you know, as if there's not any other news going on. You need to like start having a pop at the juniper as well. So
I completely agree. But the extraordinary thing was, it's not just one journalist; they all jump on it. You know, within 3 days, it's all over the papers. And but there we go. I'm sure it'll be something next.
It does bring up a point, and I know we've talked about this previously. But what we do see a lot of with distillers, particularly smaller distillers, particularly those that want to try and get a sense of place, botanical terroir, if you want to call it that, in their gins, because they have that local connection between the distillery and maybe the local customers, which is a very important thing, not just in the UK but around the world. And we have started to see people foraging more for botanicals, but that can sometimes lead to some issues. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a good problem to have for distillers, but we've seen, you know, people who have been going out sourcing something locally 2-3 years ago when they set up, and they're suddenly now selling quite a few more bottles, and actually they're finding that there's not enough, or they're being asked to produce a huge order at the wrong time of year when the stuff isn't seasonal, you know, it's not ripe or ready to go. And actually one Scottish, just come to my head, but one Scottish botanical that is a big problem at the moment is heather flowers, with the onset of heather beetle. So that's, and again, you know, that's quite a common botanical, I'd say, across quite a few gins. You know, a lot of people would be picking themselves, but if they're suddenly having to pick 100, 200, 300, 400 kilos, it becomes very difficult. So yeah, it's definitely something to think about. the weather and everything like that is just getting weirder and stranger and more difficult, and it might be at different times of year, and it's probably that case of, can you, when you pick it, can you store it for a length of time, can you freeze it, whatever it may be.
I think it's a good point, and I think this is kind of the, when people are doing recipe development, whether that's for their first gin or for or new products, I think that's something to kind of consider always. What's going to happen if I have to make 10 or 100 times the amount? You might think it's a nice problem to have, but actually it's just dreadful because you're not being able to meet orders. I guess certainly when I've spoken to people about this and made some suggestions about what they possibly can do to resolve it, I guess, and what I do see some people do is they use a mix, a combination of the two. So maybe for the mainline product, they might use, let's say they were using some local juniper or some whatever locally sourced product it was, they would use a combination of that, and maybe work with some people to maybe see if there's some way that they can increase the local supply, but then also use a combination of that and something that's come in from a supplier such as yourself, looking for the consistency in that, and then you've got that mix. I think you've got to be clear, but I think even just the fact that it would have some aspect of the local botanical in there, I think is quite good. And hey, if you have a surplus of something like that, maybe you do that as a special edition. You know, this is a special edition gin, all the botanicals have come from 15-mile radius of the distillery or something like that. I mean, that's something that you can do, but I think that consistency is quite important. And like you said, the weather is really hot, really wet, and just all over the place, so you're going to get a lot of seasonal variation. So that's one of the crazy things with the weather this year. And of course the other thing is the coronavirus, and I'm sure that has an impact on botanicals. So it'd be great to hear kind of what has happened in the last sort of 12 months since we last spoke to you, but also what you see happening for 2021. Are there things that people should be aware of, keeping an eye on?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the timing of coronavirus came probably on the core botanical harvest sort of season, right at the end. So the only one we were sort of waiting on was the citrus. So, you know, lockdown came March time. Shipments of citrus from Spain should be coming in around then. So citrus has been the only one that's been affected so far. However, we're now into sort of new season, new crops. So for us, in terms of orders are understandably well down. And we've had customers, I think, maybe selling off stock before then producing again. We've had big guys having problems with bottling lines, distribution, whatever it may be. And then obviously the route to market. So first thing to say is demand is down, and I think that has led to a huge amount of uncertainty going forward, because no one really knows what's going to happen over the next 6 months. I mean, I think we know it's lockdown, but they don't know how many bottles they're going to sell. So demand is quite uncertain, and therefore it's bloody difficult to forecast what you're going to need for the future. That doesn't help us. It's not very easy then trying to double guess what everyone will be wanting to order, but there we go. And I think we are so lucky that botanicals are non-perishable, and they can sit in a warehouse and they can sit there for 12 months, whatever it may be, without them deteriorating. I mean, you wouldn't want to be sort of buying fresh fruit, fresh veg and things like that, not knowing, you know, what the demand spike or troughs will be. So from that side of things, our warehouse, fun enough, continued throughout. They also, our warehouse, supply Warburton's bread, and considered an essential food, obviously. So they were working flat out throughout. And I think that's going to be a problem for the rest of 2020, 2021, depending on lockdown, not just here in the UK, but also abroad. Hauliers and space and freight and ports are going to find it very difficult. We've been trying to send a shipment to Spain for the last 2 weeks, and trying to find a driver who will take it to Spain is almost impossible. And you've got things like, say, Angelica route coming from Poland, or coriander from Bulgaria, juniper from Macedonia. A lot of that will come by truck. That's a driver having to cross 8-9 different borders to get to the UK. He does not want to be locked down in a foreign country, and therefore freight is definitely an issue. You can ship everything by sea, but again, everyone's trying to do that, so there's little space. There's also delays at ports. Felixstowe has been pretty bad for the last 2 weeks, although they've just hopefully opened up. And so I think that's an issue. I think things are going to take longer to get in, and it's just going to be tricky. And I think that's what we've found definitely throughout the sort of past 6 months, is that nothing's ever simple nowadays, and there always seems to be a problem. There always seems to be a catch or a delay here or an issue there. So yeah, and then we've got Brexit coming as well to add into the mix as well. So that really helps import and export.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of where we're at, sort of on a general point of view. I'd also say that a lot of our suppliers are very reluctant to take a risk now, so won't collect more or won't buy more and sit on more, because understandably they are scared of the risk that they might not be able to sell it. And so it's a sort of double-edged sword, because we're having to give them exact quantities that we want, and they're not going to then, in previous years, they probably always, if they could, and if it was easy and the price was right, they'd either pick more or process more, knowing that probably Beacon would take it, or if not, they could shift it elsewhere. But they're not wanting to do that now. So once you've made a decision, it's quite hard to say up quantities or reduce them. So that's, I think, from a general point of view, is how the virus has affected botanicals, and it will continue to affect them in 2021. As with anything, demand is the key, and we'll just have to wait and see what demand is, but it's going to be lower. I know it's going to be lower, so that might help, in that not everyone's clamoring for as much quantity as possible. However, everyone's still talking about gin. Gin's still the popular drink. You know, distilleries are still popping up. Export is getting bigger and bigger. So actually, I think demand will continue to grow, even though it's probably been nipped in the bud a bit in the UK.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's an interesting point about the hauling and the freight. It's not something that occurred to me quite in the same sort of way. So, so I guess, like, I know when we've spoken before in previous years, there's been potentially some issues with, sometimes there's been some things with coriander, and there's sometimes been some things with longer term trends, perhaps with juniper in Italy, not about disease thing, but more about the way in which it's harvested and stuff. I mean, those sort of trends and some of those things, I guess, were going along even before we had the pandemic. So, I mean, what's kind of the updates for what's going on with those?
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right about juniper. I think there's a long-term trend of poorer yields. Quality has been variable, but it looks good this year. But certainly variable yields, and there's no science behind this. This is my opinion, but you can't, you know, juniper is a wild crop. You can't continue to take more and more every year and expect it to produce. And I think we're getting to stages where the demand is just so high that collectors are stripping the bushes, being extra aggressive with the bushes, stripping next year's crop off when they should only be taking ripe berries off. And we're getting to a slight pinch point. I think there is still enough. We're not going to run out of gin, but the price is going to get higher, and it's, you know, there's more acres that they can all go to pick that are further away from roads, from villages, from homes. So it's harder, hence the price goes up. And the price goes up because demand. But I do think, you know, say 10 years ago when we bought juniper, it was either a good year or a bad year, and the price depended on that. Demand never really changed. Demand was the same. The big guys were out there, they had a certain quantity they needed to fulfill, and that was that. You moved on. Now demand is just going higher and higher. More and more people are clamoring for it, not just in the UK, but completely around the world. You know, and you've also got, which doesn't help, spice traders, even down to traders, you know, not even specialists in spices or food, are asked by gin distillers out there to try and source some juniper. So you've then got emails flying around by hundreds of people just saying, have you got any quantity? Have you got any quantity? And that just sort of all adds into the melting pot, really. You know, you can't also with juniper just go and plant as you would do in coriander. When coriander price goes through the roof, farmers go and plant more acres. You can't do that with juniper. It's wild. So it's you can't suddenly just react to the price and go, oh, let's plant an extra 1,000 acres or so.
It's quite a long time. I mean, even if there was some way that you could do that, it's quite a long time before.
Yeah, I've always believed by 8 years at least.
That was what I think, 7, 8 years. Yeah, so it's very much a long-term thing anyway to try and before we actually get anything that's usable. And then even then, you can only use a portion of it because, like you said, you've got to keep something there to propagate it. So, but that is, I mean, that's the kind of going back to the first thing we're talking about. That's kind of the crazy thing. It's like there is a bit of a story. There is a bit of a story here, but like you're like totally looking at the wrong thing. You're totally distracted by actually what potentially might be a much slower burning issue, but still an important issue, as it were. I know a couple of years ago there was issues with coriander seed. What's the sort of situation with that now?
The price of I mean, I'd say previously coriander used to be the most volatile, and it was so dependent on the harvest, but then also what India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, what their harvest was like. Because if their harvest failed and they needed coriander, they would come to Europe, they'd come to Morocco, and they'd buy huge quantities. This year, Morocco, which is always the first to harvest, had no rain at all in January, February. They're complete drought, which is when their rain is supposed to come, and the rains arrive much later, just at harvest, sort of around May time. So quality was slightly down in Morocco, but the yield was about 30% lower than usual because of the drought. And then that price then feeds on to Bulgaria, Russia, Ukraine, places like that. They know about it. So prices are a little higher, but they've all been able to harvest, and the quality to us is good at the moment from the samples and lots we've seen. So coriander, we're okay, and it's all been sort of harvested and processed now. So you know, we're not at, the only risk now for it coming into the UK will be freight and ports, sort of wise, not the actual processing of it at origin.
And then is there any other botanicals or any other things that work?
Yeah, citrus, and so I touched on citrus at the beginning about the effects coronavirus had, and that is still done all by hand. And when lockdown came in Spain, it stopped us processing. And in the sort of Murcia region, you couldn't be in the car with another person from a different household. So all the guys, that stopped a lot of our guys coming to work. They couldn't get the bus in or whatever it may be. So that was a big problem, and delayed a lot of our shipments. They're all in now, so that was a bit of a relief. But that sort of that hand processing, where lockdown will significantly affect it, could be a problem in the future. And I think we had, when we were trying to find more quantities because of the delay, a lot of farmers, when they saw the lockdown come, they sold their stock instantly. They didn't want the risk of holding it, meaning actually trying to get fresh quantities of fruit was quite difficult. And then otherwise, we've got Angelica coming up towards the end of the year. I think we're okay, that all the quantities were planted 12 months ago, so there shouldn't be any issue in terms of acreages. A few of the spices are difficult. Star anise is very difficult from a Chinese collection point of view, but we don't actually do sort of mega quantities of star anise anyway, really, into the gin trade. Cardamon's a very difficult one, but that's not coronavirus related. That's more quality and yield related. So yeah, I think of the core ones, the ones to watch are juniper, and then citrus, plus then what the whole issue with the virus is going to cause from a freight and import-export point of view.
It's very interesting to hear you say about cardamom, and I know some people absolutely love the flavour and some don't, but I do know that it is quite, even though it's used in quite small quantities in gin, can be quite a defining character for a lot of gins. So are you able to say a little bit more about that, because it's quite particularly interesting, and I think a lot of people will be keen to hear more.
Yeah, so then it's something we're looking at the moment. The big problem with cardamom is the quality. So you have, there's more than two grades, but two sort of standard grades. You have the green cardamom pods, which are lovely, bright green, consistent size, consistent color, and that really is the top quality, and what you shouldn't see on a supermarket shelf. And then you have another quality called MYQ, which is mixed yellow quality, and those will be from the same batches, same lots as the green cardamom, but they will be slightly yellow, slightly brown, slightly deformed, and they've still got all the flavor. There's nothing wrong with them, but they just don't have that bright green color, and therefore don't make the top grade. And as far as all our tests and our feedback from distillers has been, is that when you distill them, there's no difference. And obviously when you distill them, you're not looking for color anyway, but price for green cardamom is through the roof and continuing to rise, and there's just no quantity available. The big growing countries are Guatemala, which is where we buy all ours from, and or India. So
certainly in my experience, the sort of the shell, as it were, of the pod, or for want of a better term, the bit that's either green or sort of yellow and sort of is just doesn't. There's not a lot of oil in there, is there? That's not a big thing.
No, so it's the seed within it that you're in.
And I know some distillers actually are crushing their coriander beforehand just to take the seed out, so they never put the shell in there in the first place. So, so in that respect, would you say for those that use cardamom, it might be worth investigating this other grade, because
absolutely,
they can probably get the same, get the similar or the same flavor, but with a more
definitely lower price and better consistency. I mean, we're definitely moving a lot of our purchasing towards the MYQ quality.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So we'll try and keep both, but the feedback we've had is that people who've had the sample of the MYQ are more than happy. So, and at a far lower price, it makes sense.
And then I guess finally, and I know you touched on it a little bit with regard to aspects of the weather, but like a broader, with issues of climate change and things like that, is there a broader thing that you're seeing from a botanical point of view with that?
Yeah, different harvesting dates, harvesting getting earlier or later, and importance of processing. So if things are high in moisture at harvest, they need to be dried, and they need to be dried well. You know, processing, the growth of the botanical is one thing, but the processing is just as important, if not more important, because you can ruin it in the processing by either over drying, under drying, whatever it may be. I mean, juniper is this year is a good sort of example. So a lot of the collectors who pick juniper will also pick mushrooms, and they've had great weather for mushrooms this year, which meant that the mushroom harvest has lasted longer, and they make far more money from mushrooms, so they'll pick mushrooms a lot later. That pushes the juniper harvest back, so there's sort of a lot of them are only starting on juniper now. We're lucky at the moment. I checked yesterday, and it's still 25 degrees in Skopje, 25 degrees in Belgrade, so that's good. That's good collecting weather. It's still dry, so we're lucky that. So I would say that the juniper harvest will be pushed back later this year, and that's a result of good weather for mushrooms, less people picking juniper, and now only getting to the juniper now. So and I think that's you have the coriander this year that was affected by a drought in Morocco in January and February. Spain and the citrus, actually Turkey, Egypt was okay this year. No bad effects on weather. But yeah, absolutely, it's getting weirder and more wonderful, and I think we're having to open up more avenues of supply, more countries to buy from, because you get problems in different countries and you have to react to that.
It sounds somewhat like the biggest impact of the climate change is uncertainty. Would that be a reasonable thing to say?
Yeah, uncertainty. I think that's a very good way of summing it up. Yeah, it is. It's uncertain as to quality, yield, and if you're going to be able to get it.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And was there anything else that you, just before we wrap up, anything else you wanted to just add in?
No, I mean, I think the next 12 months we're going to go through some very interesting times. I think in the next 12 months we're going to find out who our best and trusted suppliers are in problems. This is where you find out most. So it's going to be a interesting, if not stressful, 12 months to come.
Good. Well, thank you very much. I know if people want to contact you, you've got the virtual booth, so people can get in contact with you via that. But thank you everybody for watching, and thank you very much for Tommy, not only for this year but for all the previous years as well. And look forward to the next update next year, hopefully with maybe a little bit better news.
Cool. Thanks, David. Thank you, everyone.